Coffin of the Iron Fortress is the domain expansion used by the disaster-cursed Jogo. The environment constructed by this domain resembles the inside of an active volcano. It's a sealed-off stone chamber with large fissures across the walls, and magma oozing from the ground. This produces an ambient heat so great that the average Jujutsu sorcerer would combust immediately upon entering the domain. This is a lethal domain that includes a guaranteed hit, meaning the user can command the environment, in this case molten rock, to hit their opponent with a can't miss attack. Jogo uses this domain expansion only once against Satoru Gojo, but couldn't deal any damage to him because of his limitless curse technique. His domain was then easily overtaken by Gojo's, but that doesn't imply that this is a weak domain. Coffin of the Iron Fortress is likely an instant kill attack for most characters in the series. Gojo's just built different. Malevolent Shrine is the domain expansion used by Sukuna, aka the King of Curses. Befitting its name, Malevolent Shrine constructs an environment centered around a small disfigured Buddhist shrine. The 4 entrances to the shrine are formed by large grotesque mouths, complete with human-like teeth and tongues. Malevolent Shrine's guaranteed hit ability relentlessly slashes apart anything until nothing but dust remains of what has been caught inside of its effective range, via Sukuna's 2 types of slashing attacks, Cleave and Dismantle, which only cease when the domain is disengaged or Sukuna is so badly injured he can no longer sustain the domain anymore. Sukuna can set which of the 2 attacks to use against specific types of targets, such as using Dismantle for inanimate objects and Cleave for subjects with cursed energy. Sukuna has the divine ability to expand his domain without closing the barrier. This creates a binding vow due to allowing an escape route from the domain that enables him to expand the effective range of the guaranteed hit up to a maximum radius of nearly 200 meters. Sukuna first uses this domain in his 2-finger form against the finger bearer, easily killing it and reclaiming the finger inside of it. The true power of this domain wouldn't be seen until the Shibuya incident, where Sukuna unleashed it in the city of Shibuya, wiping out entire city blocks and killing hundreds of people. During his battle with Gojo, he uses it a total of 3 times, and here it's revealed that Sukuna can change the conditions of his domain, like shortening its effective range to increase its output. After losing the ability to use his domain but then regaining it due to landing consecutive black flashes, Sukuna's domain appears in a new form, but can only be maintained for 99 seconds. Unlimited Void is the domain expansion used by Satoru Gojo, and later Yuta Akotsu after he takes over his body. Befitting its name, Unlimited Void brings the user and their targets inside the limitless technique itself, which is an endless void resembling outer space in appearance, with a large black hole, distant galaxies, and numerous white patches in the background. Boundless raw information floods into the target's mind, overwhelming them to the point where they're completely immobilized. The complete incapacitation of the target is caused by a phenomena where the target will be able to see and feel everything, which overstimulates the senses. This effect does not take place on the user or anyone that he's touching, whether willingly or not, which can be exploited by an opponent to become immune to the domain expansion's effects. Gojo first uses Unlimited Void to easily overpower Jogo's domain. During the Shibuya incident, he uses it for only 0.2 seconds in order to momentarily incapacitate a large number of people, but without damaging their brain and only flooding their minds with 6 months of information. During his fight with Sukuna, Gojo reveals that he's able to expand and even shrink his domain to the size of a basketball. He was also able to change the properties of the domain itself, such as making the outer layer of the domain stronger than the inner layer, in order to withstand the endless slashes from Sukuna's shrine. After taking Gojo's body using Kenjaku's body hopping technique, Yuta briefly uses the domain expansion against a reincarnated Sukuna. Horizon of the Captivating Skandha is the domain expansion used by the disaster-cursed Dagon. Dagon's domain is conjured either when Dagon forms the necessary hand sign, or when he draws a cursed seal on his stomach. This brings forth a tropical beach environment that has a forest of palm trees on one side and an endless ocean on the other. This domain channels a sure hit attack where the aquatic Shikigami that Dagon creates automatically hit their target. From the view of the target itself, the fish manifest instantly where they are, making them near impossible to block, due to the Shikigami not even existing until the very moment they hit the target, instantly eating into their flesh. Dagon was able to expand his domain when he was still in a cursed womb form, and mainly used it as a relaxing base of operations for the disaster curses. Its offensive capabilities weren't shown until he used it against Naobito, Nanami, and Maki. They were completely overwhelmed by the endless barrage of fish Shikigami until Megumi appeared to help. Toji Zenin soon enters the domain via the exit Megumi had created and completely demolished Dagon, destroying the domain. Self-Embodiment of Perfection is the domain expansion used by disaster-cursed Mahito. It creates a large black environment that presents Mahito's target with giant hands clasped together to form a flower-like shape. Connected to these hands are multiple arms that grab one another to form a net pattern that surrounds Mahito's target. This domain increases the effectiveness of Mahito's idol transfiguration by allowing him to transfigure the souls of targets within the domain without requiring physical contact. It's first used against Kento Nanami, and before he can be killed by the sure hit of the domain, Yuji breaks into it from the outside. Since the domain automatically links to the souls of everyone inside of it, Yuji entering the domain causes Sukuna to get involved and retaliate against Mahito, resulting in the domain shattering. This domain would then be used against Kokichi Muta, who used simple domain to remain unaffected by it. Mahito would soon learn how to use his domain for only 0.2 seconds, after watching Satoru Gojo do it, in order to use his technique on Yuji and Aoi Todo without having Sukuna get involved again. This transmutes Todo's arm, which he quickly cuts off before it can spread to the rest of his body. Chimera Shadow Garden is the domain expansion used by Megumi Fushiguro. While still incomplete, Chimera Shadow Garden floods the area with thick fluid shadows. This grants the user the ability to manifest multiple Shikigami, as well as advanced manipulation of all available shadows. With an enclosed barrier, Chimera Shadow Garden traps the target inside the user's shadow, recoloring the entire space into a negative palette. Anyone standing in the shadow will have to reinforce their feet with cursed energy, or risk falling into the abyss. Within the liquid-like shadows, there is no buoyancy, resistance, or oxygen. Anyone who drops into it will fall indefinitely. Since it is an incomplete barrier, Megumi can only use his domain within an enclosed area, as it serves to take place of a barrier. It was first manifested in Megumi's fight against the Finger Bearer, in which he used a combination of Shikigami and clones to narrowly defeat the curse. Megumi would later use it to cancel out the sure hit effect of Dagon's domain, and give an access point for Nanami, Maki, and Naobito to escape. While fighting in the Culling game, Megumi forcibly enclosed his domain by converting a gymnasium into his barrier, and trapped the ancient sorcerer Reggie Star inside. The domain was still incomplete, and couldn't incorporate a guaranteed hit function, but it powered up the 10 Shadows technique's overall potential to 120% of its maximum. However, Reggie uses Megumi's shadow against him, by summoning 3 cards and dropping them into the domain. Megumi can keep items inside his shadow but must bear their weight. This makes it to where the user must feel the weight of whatever is inside of it. At the time of this recording, Megumi's completed domain has not been seen yet, so we have yet to see the full potential of this domain. The Graveyard Domain is the unofficial name of the domain expansion used by the Smallpox deity, which is one of 16 registered special grade curses. This domain traps the targets within a graveyard in the middle of a forest. The sure hit of this domain instantly traps the target inside of a coffin. After the target is caught, the curse takes its left fist and lowers it into its right hand. This motion drops a giant gravestone on top of the coffin, dealing heavy damage and burying the coffin underground. Once the gravestone is placed, the disease curse begins a countdown from 3. If the count reaches 1, the target will be infected with smallpox and die. It's seen used only once, against Mei Mei and her brother whose name I hate trying to pronounce, so I won't. Mei Mei is caught in the coffin and buried once, but breaks free before the counter reaches 1. Her brother gets caught in the coffin as well, but uses simple domain to counter it, giving Mei Mei an opening to take out the smallpox curse and release the domain. Deadly Sentencing is a non-lethal domain expansion used by Hiromi Higuruma. This domain reflects a small courtroom, where the user and their target stand across one another playing the roles of prosecutor and defendant. Deadly Sentencing is the type of domain that doesn't contain a can't miss attack. Instead, it forces those inside to follow the rules of the user's curse technique. The domain isn't constructed to be lethal, and implements a binding vow requiring the user to explain the aforementioned rules. The trial-based curse technique imbued into the domain allows the user to prosecute their target, with the Shikigami called Judge Man serving as its namesake. There's no violence allowed in the domain for either side, and proceedings begin immediately after activation. First, Judge Man will announce the charges against the defendant, which are actual crimes they may or may not have committed. Judge Man automatically knows everything about everyone inside the domain, but this information isn't shared with the caster. The verdict of the trial depends only on the arguments presented by both sides. After the accusation is reviewed, the defendant is given one chance to defend their case. They have 3 options: silence, confession, or denial. The defendant's goal is to dispel all doubt and win a pronouncement of innocence from Judge Man. The prosecutor also only has one chance to make a statement, but theirs is a rebuttal based on evidence, submitted by Judge Man for deliberation. The evidence submitted appears as a sealed envelope in the prosecutor's hand. Once the prosecution and defense have both made their statements, Judge Man will deliver a lawful verdict. If the defendant is found guilty, they are punished with one of what is implied to be several different sentences. Not even the user can be sure of which sentence their opponent will receive. One sentence that Judgment will commonly give is confiscation, which prevents them from being able to use their curse technique. After the verdict, the domain dispels and the punishment immediately affects the guilty party. However, if the defendant is found guilty without an open confession, they can request a retrial that Judgment cannot deny. This was the case when Yuji demanded a retrial, after Higuruma used his domain to put him on trial and confiscate his cursed energy. During the retrial, Yuji was found guilty of mass murder because of the events of Shibuya when Sukuna had control over his body and subsequently sentenced him to death. A death sentence grants the caster of the domain a weapon made of pure energy, called the Executioner Sword, which kills anything it touches instantly. Higuruma is granted the Executioner Sword again during the all-out battle against Sukuna, in which he uses his domain to confiscate Sukuna's cursed tool and sentence him to death as well. Idle Death Gamble is a domain expansion used by Kinji Hikari. The full name of this domain, Idle Death Gamble, CR Private Pure Love Train version 1 out of 239, is based on a real pachinko machine and gets its theme from a romance manga series. The user's goal is to hit the jackpot by lining up 3 of the same symbols decorated with the characters of Private Pure Love Train. The jackpot bonus grants the user unlimited cursed energy and a fully automatic reverse curse technique for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which is the duration of the Private Pure Love Train theme song, Admiring You. The regeneration speed granted by the reverse curse technique is higher than even Satoru, Gojo, and Sukuna's. The user must participate in the flow of the game in order to hit the aforementioned jackpot, with only a 1 in 239 chance of doing so. All the rules of the game are transferred into the opponent's brain through the domain's sure hit effect. This process is harmless, and as a trade-off, the construction and curse technique infusion of this domain are extremely fast, activating in less than 0.2 seconds. The game begins in normal mode, where those inside appear on a neutral stage. As the battle begins, the user can manifest 3 different types of visual effect indicators in battle: shutter doors, reverse balls, and consecutive effects. Conjuring doors and balls are offensive attacks, but consecutive effects are defensive indicators that redo a sequence to revert damage. Doors and reverse balls come in green, red, or gold rarity to symbolize a higher chance at a jackpot. Rainbow-colored indicators, or redoing 4 consecutive effects, guarantees a jackpot. The user can choose which visual indicator to manifest, but their success is luck-based. Generating 1 or more visual indicators progresses the stage to a Richi scenario, and reveals 2 of the 3 numbers needed for a jackpot. There are 4 Richi scenarios, with different chances of hitting a jackpot, with the final train Richi having an over 80% chance. Hikari first used this domain against Charles Bernard, and then Hajime Kashimo, showing that his mastery over the domain allows him to hit the jackpot at a much higher rate than one would assume based on the odds. Time Cell Moon Palace is the domain expansion used by Naoya Zenin. Expanding this domain casts a black empty area, other than a few floating particles and the main stage of the environment. The primary stage of Time Cell Moon Palace is comprised of a straight path of flesh that leads to a large eye behind the caster. The auto-hit function of this domain injects films of animated frames into the neck of its targets. Anyone who moves within the domain must abide by the 24 frames per second rule of projection sorcery, or they receive numerous bloody injuries with every movement. The domain increases the precision of the embedded curse technique and targets the individual down to their very cells. Freezing individual cells disrupts them and causes countless small cuts and gashes to appear all over their body, completely immobilizing any target. Forcing a movement can cause an appendage to be cut off completely. Naoya expanded this domain for the first time when he was pushed to his limits, as a vengeful spirit while fighting Maki Zenin, Hagane Daido, and Rokujishi Miyo. He trapped Daido and Miyo inside the domain, and 2 lines of film were injected into both of their necks. As nothing appeared to happen, the 2 fighters assumed it was a misfire and attempted to attack. Unable to obey the 24 frames per second rule, Daido and Miyo suffered numerous small injuries all over their body. However, the domain was unable to recognize Maki, and couldn't target her without any cursed energy, meaning she was able to move freely inside the domain, and killed Naoya by attacking him from behind. Womb Profusion is a domain expansion used by Kenjaku, but is thought to potentially have originally belonged to Kaori Itadori before Kenjaku took over her body. Expanding this domain creates a totem pole-like tower of grotesque cursed spirit-like faces that are all merged together. Anyone caught within the area of its can't-miss attack will be hit with an explosive invisible force, and the specific nature of the attack remains unknown. Similar to Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine, Womb Profusion is expanded without enclosing it within a barrier, but is instead manifested into the surrounding airspace. Due to having no defined outer shell, it can't be easily dispelled, taking advantage of Yuki Tsukumo's hesitance to open her own own domain, Kenjaku expanded his domain without closing the barrier imbued in his curse technique. The barrier is immensely powerful, and it easily stripped away Yuki Tsukumo's domain down to nothing within a few moments. Without the well-defined outer shell of the closed barrier, Tengen struggled to target and dismantle Kenjaku's domain. Womb Profusion's guaranteed hit severely injured Yuki with a wave of intense gravity. Threefold Affliction is the domain expansion of the ancient sorcerer Yorozu. Expanding this domain creates a mostly blank space, with several large organic structures floating within it. They resemble the disembodied brains and ventral nerve cords of insects. The sure hit effect of the domain applies to Yorozu's constructed items. Near the end of her battle with Sukuna, Yorozu expanded her domain immediately, after constructing her most powerful weapon, the True Sphere. She opens her domain to guarantee the sphere makes contact with the King of Curses, but hesitates to activate her curse technique. Sukuna counters by summoning Maharaga, which shatters the True Sphere with his Sword of Extermination. While Yorozu watches in shock, Maharaga strikes her down as well, collapsing the domain. Authentic Mutual Love is the domain expansion of Yuta Okkotsu. Expanding this domain creates an environment that resembles a wreckage of cross-shaped structures, littered with katanas all over the landscape. The user selects a previously copied curse technique to be imbued into the domain's barrier as its guaranteed hit effect, with varying effects depending on what technique is used. Every other stockpiled curse technique is randomly imbued into the katanas within the domain. Only the caster can activate the curse techniques within the swords, although they don't know which curse technique is in which katana until they grasp it. Although each katana is destroyed after a single use, there's an unlimited number of them scattered around. Yuta first expanded his domain in response to Ryu Ishigori and Takako Uro, both of which expanding their own domains during the climax of their battle. However, the overlapping domains' conflicting conditions, as well as the interference of Kuro Rushi, caused their domains to collapse before fully forming. Yuta fully displayed the abilities of his domain during the pivotal battle against Sukuna. Imbuing Angel's technique Extinguishment into the domain's sure hit effect, Yuta was able to force Sukuna into casting and maintaining Hollow Wicker Basket to constantly neutralize the domain's barrier and disable the guaranteed hit, thus occupying half of his arms and mouths. With Sukuna handicapped, Yuta utilizes his stockpile of stolen curse techniques to give Sukuna a very hard time. However, the domain was shattered after Sukuna managed to hit Yuta with a world-cutting slash. At the time of this recording, Yuji's domain expansion has just been revealed in the manga, although it doesn't have a name yet. Expanding the domain appears to take the target to an empty train station. Inside of it, Yuji appears to have all his previous injuries healed, or this may simply be due to the domain itself casting an illusion over the target's mind. Since a domain expansion can imbue a sure hit condition, Yuji uses his domain for the first time against Sukuna, in order to guarantee that his newly awakened dismantle abilities reach the boundaries between Sukuna and Megumi's souls, in hopes of pulling the King of Curses out of Megumi's body. It'll be interesting to see what the environment of his new domain actually does, and I'm curious to know what you think this domain might actually be able to do. So let me know what you think Yuji's domain does in the comments below, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. That is it for this one though. Have an absolutely wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, whatever, and I'll see you guys in the next video.